Ancient ruins harboring terrifying curses and vengeful spirits of the past. An old hotel that's halls are lurked by ghosts of guests who checked in but never checked out. And a historic mansion plagued by strong paranormal activity await on this journey through some more of the most haunted places in New Mexico. Let's dive right in. Hey guys, and welcome back. Tonight, we're going to brave an adventure through some more of New Mexico's most haunted places. Recognized for its beautiful nature expanses, sprawling oasis-like cities, unique culture, and more, the Land of Enchantment also harbors its fair share of ancient native legends, ghost stories, and tales of the weird and inexplicable. Oh, and before we get rolling, if you enjoy my content, guys, I would highly appreciate if you subscribed, hit that like button, shared me with all of your friends, and for those of you who really want to show my channel some love, leaving me a super thanks greatly supports the videos that keep you shivering late into the night. Are you sure you're ready for this one? Our first haunt has us traveling to one of the state's most recognizable landmarks and touring where else but the New Mexico state capitol. The New Mexico State Capitol, commonly referred to as the Roundhouse, sits in Santa Fe, just off of the old Santa Fe Trail, quietly commanding its place in one of the oldest continually inhabited capitals in North America. With its sleek, circular design inspired by the sacred Zia sun symbol and flanked by sandstone walls and a domeless rotunda, it stands today as the only round state capitol in the United States and as a symbolic and architectural statement. But beneath its elegant design and modern legislative function lies a deeper current, one forged from centuries of layered sovereignty, colonial violence, national transformation, and buried unrest. And some say that after hours, that long-buried past walks the halls still. Santa Fe has served as a seat of power since 1610, when Spanish settlers established it as the capital of Nuevo Mexico, constructing the adobe palace of the governors as its governmental center. For over 2 centuries, it functioned under Spanish and later Mexican rule, until the United States seized the region in 1846 during the Mexican-American War. Now, when New Mexico officially became a U.S. territory in 1850, it was decided that Santa Fe would remain the capital. Multiple capitol buildings rose and fell on this ground before the Roundhouse ever took shape. The first, begun in 1853, was abandoned in an incomplete state due to lack of funds. A second capitol, grander and finished in 1886 with a white dome and ornate facade, would burn to the ground in 1892 under mysterious circumstances, which some suspect involved arson linked to political turmoil of the time. A third structure, completed in 1900, was later renovated and renamed the Baton Memorial Building, and is now used by other branches of the government. By the mid-20th century, however, state legislatures sought a new symbol for a modern New Mexico, something culturally distinct, regionally rooted, and utterly forward-looking. In 1964, construction began on what would become the current Roundhouse. Architect W.C. Kruger designed the structure to embody the 4 cardinal directions and blend Greek Revival symmetry with Pueblo and territorial revival elements. The result? A 4-story circle, subtly echoing indigenous cosmology, with legislative chambers built partially underground and a skylit rotunda that bathes the heart of the building in natural light. It was officially dedicated on December 8th of 1966, and within a few decades, this building would also evolve into a museum of sorts, filled with hundreds of works by New Mexican artists, native craftspeople, and modern regional voices. It was a temple of law, culture, and of identity. Yet even as it celebrates life and progress by day, the Roundhouse has been linked to a mounting array of supernatural accounts by night. Security guards, cleaning staff, and even visiting legislators working after dark have spoken of unexplained sounds, measured footsteps circling the rotunda, slow and deliberate, as though someone unseen were pacing the perimeter during a midnight debate. But when investigated, no one is ever found. Sometimes the echo of leather shoes is heard descending the staircase with no visible source, the rhythm never breaking, never speeding up, and always vanishing into silence. More unsettling are the many sightings. One former employee, who frequently worked alone in the early mornings, recounted seeing a tall man in formal attire standing below the massive Great Seal embedded in the floor of the rotunda. This man, wearing what appeared to be an early 20th century dark wool suit, stood still, hat in hand, watching the skylight. And when the employee moved to approach him, the figure took a step to the left and simply vanished, as if erased from the air. In the western corridors, several witnesses have reported hearing what sounds like muffled voices arguing behind closed office doors, only to open them and find no one there. And one custodian, during late-night maintenance, claimed to have heard a woman's voice saying, "It's not your time," from behind her. When she turned, however, the hallway was empty, and this event resulted in her quitting her position shortly after. The building's basement and sub-level service corridors are said to be particularly active spaces. Several security guards refuse to patrol the entire lower level alone. They've encountered sudden cold drafts that move against sealed doors, instances of equipment that just stops functioning until brought back upstairs, and the unmistakable sensation of being followed, of being watched. Some even claim to have captured fleeting shapes on surveillance footage, white forms just outside the reach of light that blink in and out of existence in less than a second. The attic, once used for additional storage, has become the source of several disturbing tales. One contractor reported a powerful gust of heat striking him like a wave, despite the air being unseasonably chilly, followed by a cacophonous thud of metal shelving tipping over. And when he returned with another worker to investigate, the shelf he'd believed had fallen was standing upright, unmoved, yet the floor beneath it was littered with fresh scratch marks. There have also been multiple EVP sessions conducted by amateur paranormal investigators on site, some with special access, others from outside visitors on legislative tours. Several of them have recorded faint voices, clipped phrases like "watch the doors," or "not finished," or "find it." While none can be definitively verified, their presence, along with coinciding electrical malfunctions, has been enough to convince some that the roundhouse holds more than just law and light. There is no record of violent death inside the current capital, but its spiritual weight does not appear to come from individual tragedy. Rather, it seems to be a cumulative presence, a haunting born from centuries of governance, colonial oppression, displacement, uprising, and political division. The roundhouse, in its serene geometry and curated beauty, may act as a vessel, its circular form a net for the echoes of all that came before it. Many visitors leave inspired by its art, its architecture, its peaceful symbolism, but those who remain just a bit too late, especially alone, often report an entirely different experience. In the long, quiet hours between dusk and dawn, the New Mexico state capitol seems to come alive with memory. You can hear this memory in the echo of footsteps that aren't yours, feel it in the static tension that lingers in the air, and see it just beyond the edge of vision. And if you do linger too long, you may find yourself walking in a circle, like those who came before you, drawn again and again to the same center, the same echo, the same stillness that never really lets you go. Our second haunt predates the very founding of our country by millennia and has us walking the ancient pathways of the El Malpais National Monument. The El Malpais National Monument sprawls across the wild volcanic lowlands of Cibola County, New Mexico, a stark and jagged landscape whose black basalt flows stretch like the remnants of some ancient cataclysm, frozen in time but far from quiet. Known for its caves, craters, sandstone bluffs, and ancient cairn-marked trails, the name El Malpais, the Badlands, was given to the area by early Spanish explorers in reference to the region's harsh, inhospitable terrain. But long before any colonial incursion, these lands were held sacred, navigated by ancestral peoples and imbued with a significance that seems to linger still, as if the land itself resents having ever been tamed. Archaeological evidence shows human presence in the Malpais region dating back at least 10,000 years or so. Paleo-Indians and archaic hunters traversed the broken lava plains and hunted game amongst its juniper and pinyon groves. By the 12th century, the ancestors of the Pueblo people, primarily the Zuni and Acoma, had begun building masonry villages along the edges of the lava flow, including at sites near the El Calderon area and in the surrounding sandstone ridges. These communities used the land with reverence. Their vast cave systems were used to store food and ice, and ceremonial trails were carefully marked with stacked stone cairns still visible today. For them, El Malpais was not barren. It was alive, a testing ground, a border between worlds. As centuries passed, oral tradition told of great eruptions, events preserved in myth and ritual, and when Spanish explorers entered the region through the late 1500s, they quickly learned to respect the locals' knowledge of the terrain, relying on native guides to cross the treacherous flows. Yet they saw the land as cursed and inhospitable, earning it its rather foreboding name. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, Spanish colonial expeditions skirted the edges of the area, avoiding the volcanic fields that even horses would refuse to cross, and El Malpais became a borderland between empires, a region unclaimed by the missions, unsettled by the military, and untouched by agriculture. It remained a vast, smoldering unknown. During the 19th century, as the American frontier expanded westward, surveyors, railroad scouts, and homesteaders attempted to map and settle the region. The nearby town of Grants eventually formed, driven by the coming of the railroad in 1882. Even so, the Malpais itself resisted, and settlers who tried to homestead the lava fields found them impossible to cultivate. Stone ruins of failed cabins and abandoned ranching attempts still dot the more navigable peripheries. During World War II, parts of the lava fields were used as military training grounds, and it's believed that sections of the McCarty's lava flow were bombed and low-altitude test runs, as dark streaks and unnatural pockmarks in the rock remain as quiet reminders. By the late 20th century, rising environmental awareness and a recognition of the land's sacred importance to the Puebloan and Navajo tribes led to a formal protection. In 1987, El Malpais National Monument was established by Congress, preserving more than 114,000 acres of lava fields, cave systems, and cultural artifacts. Today, the monument and the adjacent National Conservation Area serve not just as geological marvels, but as spiritual repositories, sacred places where the past is felt just as much as it's seen. Despite its isolation, however, or perhaps because of it, El Malpais has developed a reputation for something else, something far less welcoming than its scenery. And hikers, campers, and researchers alike have all spoken of the feeling of being watched amongst the lava tubes, of hearing footsteps approaching on trails where no one else was present, and of voices that echo through the caves and that fade the moment anyone tries to find their source. The landscape, broken and sharp, does not carry sound normally. Voices travel oddly, sometimes not at all, and sometimes too far. The deeper one travels into the lava tubes like Big Skylight or Junction Cave, the more distorted the echoes become, until some say it feels as if you've slipped entirely out of sync with the surface world. Multiple hikers have gone missing here over the years, and more than a few were never found. While some are presumed lost to the disorienting terrain, others left behind strange stories. One group reported following the sound of faint drumming, believing it was another group ahead of them, only to find no one else had signed in on the register past their entry, while another lone hiker claimed to hear music underground, a low humming like flutes and wind chimes that led him deeper and deeper into the cave, where his flashlight failed. This hiker was eventually found, curled up near the exit, speaking in broken Spanish and unable to recall his own name for hours. Some visitors have reported glowing orbs in the distance, small bobbing lights resembling lanterns drifting just over the basalt. These lights tend to appear during storms or near dusk, and vanish as quickly as they first emerged. And one park volunteer that attempted to follow one, believing it might be another group needing help, ended up losing his bearings and walking in circles for hours. When he returned, the radio on his belt had died, its batteries drained despite being fully charged before his shift. In the ice caves, even seasoned researchers have encountered disturbing cold spots far deeper than the ambient conditions could explain, and more than one scientist has described the sensation of being followed, light footsteps echoing behind them, only for the cave to fall utterly silent when they turn. One report from the 1990s even recounts a team emerging from a lava tube to find their backpacks moved, stacked in a neat pile that none of them had touched. Photography and equipment malfunctions are all but common. Cameras misfire or capture static, batteries die without warning, GPS devices spin erratically, and in one documented case, a drone being used to survey the terrain crashed after it began veering off course, seemingly pulled toward a ridge where nothing should have interfered. When recovered, its onboard footage showed several seconds of pure blackness, interrupted only by a single frame of what looked like a human silhouette standing in the lava, a figure no one on the team remembered seeing. There are no ghosts with names here, no known deaths on site to anchor the legends to one single soul, but perhaps the land doesn't need a name to be haunted. Perhaps it holds memories in its stone, memories of those who crossed it, of those who died trying, and of those who never left. Some Pueblo elders still advise against wandering too far off trail, not for safety alone, but because the land is alive, and not all such places are meant to be touched. For those who have stayed overnight at the edge of the monument often describe waking to the sound of distant chanting, of wind moving unnaturally through the rocks, or to the very clear feeling that something just stepped past their tent, something they never see but always feel. El Malpais is a place that wears time on its surface, raw, unhealed, and trembling just beneath the crust. It may not be home to any identifiable spirit, but rather to a chorus of them, bound not by death alone, but by reverence, fear, and awe. A place still claimed by fire, stone, and silence. And for those who step too far from the cairns, who walk too long under the black stars and volcanic dust, this land has ways of reminding them that they were never alone to begin with. And on to number 3, which takes us on a tour of the iconic and historic Palace of the Governors. In the heart of Santa Fe Plaza stands a low-slung adobe structure whose weathered timbers and earthen walls have borne silent witness to over 4 centuries of colonization, rebellion, governance, and unrest. Known as the Palace of the Governors, this site is often celebrated for being one of the oldest continuously occupied buildings in the United States. But that longevity is more than just a point of pride. It's a doorway into a layered and often haunted history, one soaked in blood, resistance, ceremony, and rumor. Though it welcomes thousands of tourists each year and serves as the nucleus of the New Mexico History Museum complex, there are many who believe that not everything within its walls has moved on. Construction of the palace began in 1610 under the directive of Pedro de Peralta, the first Spanish royal governor of New Mexico, who selected the site to establish administrative control over the sprawling and often hostile northern frontier of Spain's North American holdings. The building itself was designed not merely as a seat of governance, but as a fortification. Its adobe walls several feet thick, its rooms arranged to protect against both indigenous resistance and political uprisings. It quickly became the power center for Spanish rule in the region, housing not only government officials, but also courtrooms, military personnel, armories, and even dungeons for prisoners awaiting judgment or execution. In its earliest days, this seat of colonial authority represented something deeply feared and hated by the native peoples, whose land and culture it was built to subjugate. That tension exploded violently in 1680, when the Pueblo peoples, long subjected to forced religious conversions, enslavement, and brutal suppression, orchestrated a rebellion that would become one of the most successful indigenous uprisings in North American history. The palace, then under siege, became both a last stand and a grave for Spanish rule. Then Governor Antonio de Oderman and his men were trapped inside for days, holding off attackers until their water ran out. They were ultimately driven south, abandoning Santa Fe to the victorious Pueblo Alliance, who briefly took over the palace and used it as a center of operations. The Spanish would return 12 years later under Diego de Vargas, launching a reconquest that involved promises of peace, followed by a wave of brutal reprisals and executions. The palace would eventually again become a seat of rule, but its walls now held the residual memories of violent upheaval and the suffering of those who had dared to defy the empire. As the centuries rolled on, the palace would shift hands and titles, but not function. With Mexican independence in 1821, it would become the provincial capital of the Mexican Republic, and in 1846, with the onset of the Mexican-American War, the United States flag was raised over the building, and it would transition yet again, this time into a symbol of American territorial expansion. It was within these walls that General Stephen W. Kearny declared New Mexico a possession of the U.S., and where successive territorial governors held office, including Lew Wallace, the author of Ben-Hur, who reportedly actually wrote parts of this manuscript within its rooms. And later, during the Civil War, Confederate forces would occupy Santa Fe briefly, and the palace would again change hands, its flags replaced, then re-replaced as the nation fractured around it. Through fire, decay, and shifting regimes, the building remained standing, its adobe bones absorbing the heat of cannon fire and the quiet murmur of political scandal alike. By the dawn of the 20th century, however, it had fallen into disrepair. Preservationists stepped in and transformed it into a museum, which it remains as today. But despite fresh coats of plaster, the curated exhibitions, and the artifacts on display in educational manners, those who know the building well insist that its past is never far from the surface. And as the sun dips below the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, that past has a habit of coming alive. Security guards, museum employees, and even overnight maintenance crews have reported hearing phantom footsteps echoing through empty corridors long after closing. Doors locked and double-checked have been found ajar the next morning, and on more than one occasion, entire exhibits have been discovered disturbed, glass cases opened, display items moved or knocked to the floor. These incidents are rarely made public, but internally, they're discussed with uneasy frequency. A custodian once reported hearing whispering voices in an unlit exhibit hall near the foundations of the original 17th century structure. He called out, thinking another staff member was speaking, only to realize the building was otherwise empty. When he turned the corner, he was met with a sharp gust of wind and the distinct scent of burning wax, though there were no candles in use and no open windows. The section of the building that once housed holding cells has a particularly sinister reputation. Visitors walking near the preserved jail cell often speak of a sudden heaviness in the chest, as though something oppressive were clinging to the air. More than one tourist has abruptly turned pale and fled the area, overcome with nausea, confusion, or dread, and paranormal investigators who have conducted after-hours studies in the palace claim to have captured disembodied voices in Spanish, sometimes angry, sometimes pleading, and in one particular recording taken near the West Wing, a raspy voice that repeated a single phrase, "No me dejes morir aquí," or "Don't let me die here." There are also reports of shadowy figures glimpsed on the old colonnade at night. Witnesses have described seeing what they believe to be a man in colonial-era dress pacing slowly beneath the portal, only to vanish as they approach, while others have seen lights flickering on and off in rooms with no electricity, or heard the sound of distant boots striking tile floors, as if a long-dead soldier were still on patrol here. Notably, a tourist once captured a photo of the central courtyard at dusk, and upon reviewing it, later noticed a pale figure standing in the window of an upstairs room, arms folded, face obscured, and no tours had been scheduled at that hour. In fact, the room in question had been locked all day. The feeling of being watched across the property is all but common, especially near the older parts of the palace, and staff working alone late into the evening report a creeping sensation of not actually being alone, with a few admitting to quietly asking permission before locking up, out of a strange and involuntary sense of deference, like they're not the ones in charge, not really. Even during daylight hours, museum goers have commented on sudden chills or moments of inexplicable unease, especially when standing over the glass floor panel that reveals the building's 17th century stone foundations. What makes the Palace of the Governors so unnerving isn't a single grisly event, but the cumulative weight of centuries of sorrow, violence, and shifting power embedded in its very walls. Unlike other haunted sites that cling to a single tragedy, the palace is a sponge of pain, absorbing hundreds of individual stories over the span of 400 years. The spirits here don't announce themselves with a dramatic flair, but with slow, creeping dread, with footsteps that never reach their destination, and with voices that never rise above a whisper. At night, when the plaza empties and the adobe softens in the chill desert air, those who pass it feel a presence watching from beyond the thick wooden doors. Sometimes it's a governor, sometimes a prisoner, sometimes something older, and for those who listen carefully, they might just hear the floorboards creak with a footstep that's not their own, or catch the distant echo of laughter no longer spoken aloud. For in this palace, where history refuses to be forgotten, sometimes even the dead seem reluctant to leave. Our fourth haunt lands us in Gallup and has us checking in at the prestigious El Rancho Hotel. The El Rancho Hotel rises from the red-dusted horizon of Gallup, New Mexico, like a relic from a Golden Age Western, a grand lodge where the flicker of Hollywood once intermingled with Navajo winds. Constructed in 1936 by R.E. Griffith, brother of silent film pioneer D.W. Griffith, the lodge was intended as a sanctuary for stars and film crews drawn to the rugged beauty of Monument Valley and its surroundings. Its soaring log beam ceilings, twin staircases, twin fireplaces, expansive balconies, and guest rooms, named after legends like John Wayne, Katharine Hepburn, Humphrey Bogart, and Ronald Reagan, conjure an atmosphere that's both dramatic and elegant. But tucked beneath the veneer of stardust, the land and building alike absorbed echoes of deeper stories, some rooted in indigenous heritage, others born of frontier hardship, and still more forged by hidden corridors of crime and desperate survival. Gallup itself sits on ancestral homelands of the Zuni, Navajo, and other Puebloan nations, where, centuries before Route 66 was ever imagined, cultures thrived in a landscape of red mesas, deep canyons, and wandering buffalo. The hotel's very land may have hosted ceremony or homesteading long before its logs were hewn and its hearths lit. Railroad expansion brought high desert camps and restless workers. Bootlegging networks and illicit entertainments followed, some allegedly beneath the very foundations of the lodge. Whispers of early tunnels used for everything from gambling to secret transport wove through local rumor, linking the property's streets to a subculture of survival and lawlessness. And as the cameras rolled above, some of that underbelly became embedded in the walls themselves. Almost immediately after opening, small but persistent disturbances emerged. Employees on the second floor frequently heard heavy boots pacing overhead, in rooms with no floors above them, just the ceiling, just the cold night air, and the slow thump of unseen steps. Incidentally, staff referred to this phenomenon simply as the stride. What they never explained, however, was why it marched so relentlessly and why no echo would fade. Guests even reported waking up to laughter, indistinct conversations, and sometimes even to the shutters snapping against their frames in feigned surprise, only to discover an empty hallway beyond. The infamous bridal suite incident remains a benchmark of El Rancho's mystery. As it's told, a housekeeper, freshening the room one afternoon, saw a pile of clothes rise off the bed, shaping into what appeared to be a body silhouette before collapsing silently back down. Shocked, she fled and never returned alone, and the room was said to have been unlocked only moments before her arrival, with no electrical or mechanical system capable of animating clothing in midair. Room 506, formerly dedicated to Susan Hayward, has become a victim of its renown. Within, digital devices inexplicably shut off while plugged in, sealed water bottles suddenly leak, couples wake to feel movement in the bed, and pets in the room have flown into terrified panic at something unseen, with one traveler awakening when his eyelids were literally pried open, his body paralyzed by fear, an experience he shared later in a hushed tone at checkout, and another guest testified that midnight voices whispered 2 words over and over again: "Don't go." The lobby's hearth and restaurant bar hold their own unease. Chairs have been found moved in symmetrical patterns as though someone performed an unseen ritual. Televisions power on into static at precisely 3 a.m., and a retired bartender once watched a suited figure brush past the bar, depositing no glasses but exuding an aura of cigarette smoke and cologne from a vanished era. Also carved into memory are the soft strains of a slow waltz drifting from the ballroom after hours, followed by abrupt silence when approached. But a photograph from one guest stands out, a shadowy silhouette, upright and bowed slightly, hovering in the lobby's mezzanine. Notably, this guest later became convinced it was his father, who'd once dined here and passed years earlier. The deeper, darker stories lie hidden in back corridors and below-ground bunkhouses, tunnels of unlit passage that staff say nobody has formally documented. Contractors there have reported faded symbols carved into beams, meters of structural anomalies inconsistent with the lodge's original blueprints, and EMF spikes in empty hallways, with one electrician actually smelling iron and stale blood in a sealed service closet, and another recording a guttural moan near midnight, though no pipes or machinery operate at that hour. Some legends suggest that a young bellhop vanished in the 1940s after encountering something unsettling in these tunnels. While no official record supports this disappearance, staff swear that his soft footsteps, faint laugh, and even brief glimpses of a slim, dark figure dressed in 1940s attire still creep through those corridors. Additional stories from staff deepen this unease. A night shift housekeeper reported feeling a soft hand touch her arm as she walked down a service hallway. Another guard claims to have glimpsed a woman in full 1940s dress drifting through a storage area that paused, looked back at him with hollow eyes, then passed through shelves and vanished. And a member of the Ortega family recounted checking out a man at the front desk whose wrist had a warm, deliberate tap, even as he stood alone. This young man remained transfixed, unable to speak, mouthing fragments of memory unknown to anyone else. Paranormal teams, amateur and professional, have staged a series of investigations at El Rancho. Their recordings reveal night-long footsteps on unmapped upper floors, spirit box sessions capturing "I'm watching" or camera, thermal readings dropping by 12 degrees in spots where no vents or doors exist, and brief, near-transparent silhouettes caught at the edge of infrared frames, with one expedition recording a slow, deliberate echo of dragging behind a false wall, accompanied by chills so sharp that glassware rattled. Yet the hotel itself remains gracious and silent. There are no tours of haunted rooms, no Halloween packages or themed cocktails. Instead, they offer supper clubs, fireplaces, vintage decor, and an ambiance of classic Route 66 nostalgia. The hauntings aren't displayed, they're discovered, and guests seldom report feeling in danger, just very unsettled, aware of something breathing in the wood grain, lingering in the spaces between lights, and drifting between door frames late at night. Guests that check out often share lingering impressions, the sensation of a presence in the bed beside them, the smell of old tobacco smoke at 2 a.m., the clearing breeze across dusty carpet when no window is open, and the unshakable feeling that a silent observer remains once the room is empty. And some say the hotel tips into silence after midnight, as if its heartbeat slows. The footsteps grow softer, the curtains still, for El Rancho doesn't perform its ghosts, it incubates them, quiet, respectful, unadvertised, giving them room to exist on their own terms. And for those who stay past check-in and allow their guard to fall, the hotel may not give a fright, but it gives something deeper. A reminder that buildings built for glamour and commerce also serve as vessels of time, capturing echoes of forgotten voices, unrecorded events, and the generation-spanning memories of land and labor. El Rancho doesn't haunt its guests, it watches. And sometimes, as they step out onto the balcony at first light, the weight of history, memory, and presence eases. Not out of kindness, but out of indifference. It's a release offered to those who respect the quiet between footsteps, as if the place is winding down again, but its stories most certainly remain, waiting for the sun to descend again, and for nightfall to arrive. Saving the scariest for last, our fifth and final hunt lands us at another one of New Mexico's ancient landmark sites, and has us exploring the Aztec Ruins National Monument. Long before any road was paved through the northwestern edge of New Mexico, before Gallup had lights or Santa Fe had its cathedral, the people known as the ancestral Puebloans were carving their lives into the land, stacking stones in perfect rows, shaping their sacred spaces with mathematical precision, and aligning their lives with the movements of the sun and stars. In what is now San Juan County, near the confluence of the Animas and San Juan rivers, rose one of the most enduring and mysterious remnants of their world, the Aztec Ruins, a sprawling Chicoan outlier community that has endured for nearly 1,000 years. Despite its name, the Aztec ruins have nothing to do with Aztec civilizations of central Mexico at all. European settlers arriving in the 19th century, unfamiliar with the architectural complexity and age of what they found, mistakenly attributed the ruins to the more widely known Mesoamerican culture. Unfortunately, however, the name stuck, even as archaeologists uncovered overwhelming evidence that the site was built not by the Aztecs, but by the aforementioned Chicoan, an advanced and highly organized society that flourished in the Four Corners region roughly from 900 to 1150 AD. This complex was likely constructed between 1100 and 1200 AD, during the final flourish of the Chicoan civilization, and what they left behind was staggering. A multi-story great house containing over 400 interconnected rooms, organized around a central plaza and supplemented by over 24 kivas, or round subterranean ceremonial chambers with clear spiritual significance, the largest of which, the reconstructed Great Kiva that spans nearly 50 feet in diameter and that's believed to have been a major gathering place for rituals, storytelling, governance, and celestial observation. Their architecture was not just functional, but precise. The north wall of the Great House aligns perfectly with the rising sun during the summer solstice, and the setting sun during the winter solstice, a feat of astronomical alignment that reveals an astonishing degree of knowledge and planning. Masonry techniques mirror those found in Chaco Canyon itself, being thin sandstone slabs interlocked with core and veneer constructions. Original roof timbers of pine and juniper still visible after 8 centuries of exposure. And overall, everything about the site suggests not only a high level of social organization, but a civilization deeply rooted in the landscape, spiritually as well as physically. Yet something eventually changed. By the late 13th century, the site was left abandoned. Theories abound, including climate instability, prolonged drought, over-farming, social conflict, and spiritual shifts. And while nothing is certain, what is clear is that the inhabitants did not simply vanish. They migrated, joining other pueblos to the south and east, carrying with them their traditions, their oral histories, and perhaps their spirits. Centuries passed, and by the time white settlers rediscovered the site in the 1800s, its purpose was a mystery to most. Ranchers and curiosity seekers carted away pottery, disturbed burials, and dismantled walls for building materials. And it wasn't until 1916 that serious excavation began under archaeologist Earl Morris, who worked tirelessly to preserve and study what remained. Subsequently, in 1923, the ruins were declared a national monument, ensuring their long-term protection, but by then, something else had already awakened within them. Park rangers and preservationists began reporting unusual occurrences, most often at night, when all the tourists had gone home and the only sound that should have been was the wind through the cottonwoods. Footsteps on gravel, always measured, always slow, pacing in deliberate circles around the Great Kiva, whispers carried just out of comprehension, and the sense, not of menace, but of being observed, of being watched from darkened doorways or from behind broken walls by something unseen, yet deeply aware. One ranger, who had worked the park for over 2 decades, described feeling an oppressive weight settle on his chest as he descended into the Great Kiva alone after dark. The temperature dropped nearly 20 degrees in seconds, and though the air was still, he heard what he later described as breathing. Not his own, mind you, but something vast and slow, like the exhale of a great sleeping animal. This ranger promptly fled the Kiva and refused to re-enter it after sundown from that point forward. Visitors, too, have reported strange encounters. Some claim to hear chanting, low rhythmic tones emerging from the kivas at dusk, where no ceremonies have taken place for centuries. Others say they've seen lights, small orbs of dull bluish glow drifting across the plaza or hovering over the kiva entrances, before winking out, and cameras malfunction inside certain rooms, fully charged batteries draining in minutes, with photographs taken within the ruins, on occasion revealing faint human forms, partial silhouettes, faces with indistinct features, arms outstretched as if gesturing in welcoming or warning. There are more physical experiences too. One guest walking the site alone claimed to feel a hand press gently but firmly against his back, directing him toward the center of the plaza. He turned, expecting to see a guide or fellow tourist, but he was alone, and when he reached the plaza, he felt the presence recede. Another visitor described hearing what sounded like the pounding of feet, many feet, running in unison, across the rooftops, through the buildings that have long been roofless and are structurally incapable of bearing such weight. Perhaps the most unnerving stories come from the East Ruin, a largely unexcavated section of the site rarely visited by the public, where rangers describe the atmosphere as heavy, where tools go missing, radios emit static when approaching the perimeter, and one archaeologist actually left a field journal on a stone ledge overnight and returned to find the pages scattered and soaked, though there had been no rain. Deep within the brush, someone or something seems to move just ahead of every footstep, always out of sight, but close enough to stir dust, snap a twig, or rustle branches. Puebloan elders today still regard Aztec ruins with reverence. For them, it is not a relic, but a living place, one that remembers. And many believe the spirits of the builders and their descendants may still linger, bound by love, ceremony, or unfinished purpose. The kivas are not exactly abandoned, but occupied by memory, with some spiritual leaders cautioning against entering them disrespectfully, especially alone, and one Hopi elder visiting during a solstice ceremony, claiming to have sighted shadows standing still within the kiva before the sun rose, and then watching them fade when light touched the floor. Others speak of ancestral guardians, figures not malevolent but firm in presence, tasked with maintaining the sanctity of the site. They do not seek to harm, but to remind. Their gestures, cold winds, sudden chills, and overwhelming urge to pause are warnings, not attacks. For the Aztec ruins, in this view, is a place where time has folded in on itself, and where the border between past and present is tissue thin. At night, the ruins change, the air stills, the stars brighten, the silence becomes complete, and then, slowly, gently, there comes the sense of something rising. A rhythm, a breath, a memory made manifest. Those who stay too long sometimes say they forget the year, forget where they parked, forget what they came for. They are enveloped momentarily by the site's ancient tempo, and when they return, blinking into the present, they often feel as though they've brought something back with them, something that follows quietly. The Aztec ruins does not shout its ghosts. It doesn't need to. It's a cathedral of stillness where even the walls seem to hum with stories, and those who walk its corridors with open hearts and quiet footsteps may feel not just the presence of the past, but the past itself, listening, waiting, watching. And even those who do not listen may find themselves walking in circles, hearing whispers in languages they don't understand, and feeling deep in the back of their minds that something from 1,000 years ago has stepped quietly into the present. Thanks for joining me on this journey through some more of New Mexico's most haunted places. If you enjoyed hearing my histories and ghost stories, subscribe to my channel, throw this upload a like, and share me with anyone you think could use a good scare. I'll catch you all next time, and stay spooky.